Would you like me to let you get settled in, or are you ready to
I'm
go?
good to go.
I know it's the end of your day. I want to make sure you're good, and yeah, we'll start the whole thing if you're ready.
Ready to go.
Okay, excellent. Hey, this is Mark Justice, and welcome back to Between the Lines. Today, kiddies, we've got a pretty fun interview. We're going to be talking with Matthew Dennion. Matthew's written some pretty fun books, kaiju books, big monster books like Atomic Rex and Chimera, Final Host, and Polar Yeti. So, Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you reaching out to me to be on the show. I'm very excited to talk about writing monster books and monsters in general and whatever else you want to talk about as well.
Excellent. That sounds good. We're going to have a good time. Well, I guess, I like to start with big picture kind of questions and kind of goes back. I think there's a lot of things that happen to us in our early years are foundational to what we become later on, or how we respond to things. So growing up, who were some of your favorite writers, or at least some of your favorite books?
I was a huge fan of like the Edgar Rice Burroughs books. So like Tarzan, Pellucidar, the John Carter books. I always really enjoyed the fast pace and high action that he would put into his stories, where I felt like he did a good job of like having character development and engaging you with the characters without sacrificing any of the fun or the adventure or the action that you could have in a book. So I try to emulate that in my writing.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, there's a lot of imagination. I love that era too. Those pulp writers.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah.
And I grew up reading Lee Falk's The Phantom.
Oh,
And,
another
and
great one. Yeah.
yeah, and then a lot of H.G. Wells and things like that. Mary
Yeah.
Shelley's.
Big Doc Savage fan.
I never.
Shadow.
Oh, yeah, Shadow. I never really got the Doc Savage, but like the Shadow was always around because my dad liked it. And he was a
Mhm.
huge Phantom fan, which is how I got into it.
Right.
Same thing with like Flash Gordon,
Yep.
those kind of characters. And then I started getting into when I was a teenager. I started buying the Tarzan books, and just I really like the idea of collecting books at the time. Like and there's a
Yes, I
series
understand.
like there was like 30 Tarzan books, like and they were thin and like cheap. I'm like, well, I just gotta have them, and the covers were just so really awesome.
Yes.
Um, yeah, and I just thought those are just tremendous fun reads. So I totally understand that connection to Rice Burroughs. Um, so what attracted you to the kaiju genre?
Oh, that was easy. My dad, as a kid, he was a big like sci-fi monster fan, and I'm sure you might be old enough to remember this too. He would sit down with me and my brother on Saturday afternoons and watch like used to have creature features on like public access TV type of stuff. So he was a big fan of Ray Harryhausen. So we always would watch the
Mm.
Harryhausen movies they were
Oh
on.
yeah.
Like those classics, Beast and 20,000 Fathoms, 20 Million Miles to Earth, Jason and the Argonauts, on and on. And of course, we would get a lot of the Godzilla and Gamera movies mixed in there too, which were always
Hmm.
enjoyable. But it was definitely those films which got me hooked at a young age.
Yeah. I remember seeing our local theater had this like, summer program, um, where it was like 10 movies. I think there was like I don't know, maybe $1 a piece, or like, during the summer or something. It was just so cheap, or even 50 cents a piece. It was ridiculous. And one of the movies they showed, there were two Sinbad movies they showed, like Seventh Voyage, and I think maybe Sinbad in the Eye of the, or was it the Golden Voyage? Sinbad, I think, or was Sinbad, was it, I think it
Seventh
might have
Voyage
been
is a muddy one. They're all
seventh.
good, but
Seventh Voyage, and then Jason and the Argonauts. I mean, these
yeah,
were like classic movies that I'd seen them on television, but never
right.
seen them on the big screen. And that's a whole other kind of experience. It's so
Oh,
immersive that
absolutely.
way. No, I totally get that. And then growing up with local horror hosts out of Cleveland, we were always watching monster movies. And then, Superhost had Godzilla and Gamera. I mean, and then Ultraman and Johnny Sacco,
Sure.
from like
Yeah.
the smallest memories, like 4 years old, watching these things when I came home from school. So do you have a favorite kaiju movie? And kaiju means giant monster, kids. I don't think if I haven't explained it clearly enough. It's a
Right.
Japanese word meaning giant monster or terrible beast. Um, so do you have a favorite kaiju, like, a- as a creature? Who's your favorite?
I'm actually a bigger Kong fan than anything. probably because with those movies I would see as a kid, the first 1933 Kong was one of the first movies I can remember seeing, and just, I mean, fell in love with that movie. It's got such a fast pace, and especially as a young kid, like, before you know it, you're on the island and Kong's fighting dinosaurs, and then he's in New York and he's rampaging through, and you've got the love story, which even as a young kid, you can relate to, because you might not get romantic love as a young kid, but you might like love your dog, so you kind of
Sure.
get that,
Yeah.
like connection with
Right.
that, like for Kong and Ann feel for each other.
Yeah.
That's probably my favorite kaiju overall. Favorite movie tends to change depending on the mood I'm in. So like if I want something kind of dark and gritty, I'm a big fan of the GMK Godzilla with like Mothra, King Ghidorah, Baragon.
Yeah.
It's fun, but at the same time, like sometimes I just want something that's really off the wall and goofy, so I can watch like a Godzilla versus Megalon and really enjoy it. It just kind of
Yeah.
depends on what I'm in the mindset for at that time.
Sure. I love GMK. I think it's one of the strongest entries in the whole series, because it's so dark, and it's a retelling of especially King Ghidorah, or Ghidorah, however you want to pronounce it. King Ghidorah's
Right.
origins, in a way. All of them. There's these protector spirits, and
Right.
and that concept of, though, even though it's a villain, it doesn't mean it can't be heroic.
Yeah.
And they brought some power and potency to Godzilla's atomic breath weapon, where it's like literally a bomb going off in the distance. I mean, and the design was really kind of frightening, with like
Yes.
the
What's more,
soulless white eyes. I mean, it's just a creepy design.
yeah, it's more of like a horror design. It has a very Lovecraftian feel to it. Which if your defense don't know, like H.P. Lovecraft is very known for like cosmic horror type stuff,
Yes.
and GMK would fall into that. And I did, like you said, kind of enjoy the juxtaposition of King Ghidorah being a hero for once. It's like if you read a DC Elseworlds comic or a Marvel What If, where they'll switch things on their heads like that, where like the Joker's a hero for whatever reason, or the Green Goblin, and you get that kind of different perspective. I thought that was kind of neat too to play around with.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, those are fun. I love those what ifs and the Elseworlds, that DC put out. And um yeah, I thought that was next to, I think my favorite suit design is probably the Destroyer. The
Oh yes, yes,
Godzilla from Destroyer. I think it's just really such a beautiful suit of that era. That
right.
really pyramidic shape. But then I love GMK, and then I really really love Shin. That
Shin
is
is
just a
fantastic. I love
nightmare
it too.
nightmare fuel. You
Yes,
know, um, my only, like, I love the story. I love the way it was shot. I like how seeing things bogged down on the political point of view, and
yes,
I love the story. I just wanted Godzilla to do more stuff, to like move more, instead of being this kind of monolith. He stands there and these helicopters are just kind of like shooting at him. Like, do something, like,
right.
walk around, be menacing and terrifying, and spread that. You got the waddling like turkey coming through the street.
Yeah,
Like, do something, other than just stand there. But that was my only criticism of it. But that I love that design. It is just terrifying. I'd like to see them continue that story in some
yeah,
way.
I would too. It's very nightmarish. Uh, the design, I get what you're saying, because one thing that usually draws people to kaiju films is that they're more than just big animals. They usually have some kind of personality to them, which is really a stretch in Shin. Now I get it. Shin's more of like an Engine of Destruction '54 type of throwback. That's why I do enjoy that film.
Mhm.
But yeah, I can see the complaint that he doesn't have the personality that is usually installed in Godzilla movies or other kaiju movies like that.
Sure. Yeah, I get it. So what was it that first drew you into writing? Like, when you went
Um,
from reader to writer, something happens that makes that transition. What was it for you?
yeah, it was. Oh, that's a very good question. So it's kind of incremental steps for me. I think the journey first started was my mom and dad split up when we were young, and my brother and my sister and I were kind of stuck at home a lot. And this is in the days before the internet, so we didn't have like a whole lot to do. My brother and I would sort of like kind of do these, like, hey, why don't you try writing a story? So I would do like a monster story, and he would do one, and we just kind of swap them and see what we thought. So that was like where I first started. Writing stories, but it wasn't really much for anything other than my brother and I when I was a kid. So I didn't really like do a whole lot with it. Then after I really got into writing, when I became a teacher, so I do work as a teacher for students with autism. So you've worked as a teacher too, it's a very writing intensive career to be in.
Hmm.
So you're always writing lesson plans or behavior plans or whatever. And on top of that, I started doing work for my thesis for my master's degree. And what I had found was that I needed to take breaks between all that work I was doing. But if I took a break to like watch TV or something like that, I couldn't get my mind back into like that high track that I needed to do to complete a thesis or to write lessons or to create lessons. So I just started writing for fun. And it had started out with, we mentioned the Shadow earlier. I came across a Shadow website that was just looking for some, like fanfics to put up there. So I thought I'll just write a few short stories and send it out there and see what happens. And lucky enough, Shadow Sanctum really liked them, so they started picking them up. I did a couple pieces for them, and then it caught the attention of Black Coat Press. So I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but Black Coat Press publishes out of France, and what they do is predominantly short story anthologies featuring mainly public domain characters. So
Oh,
characters
okay.
like
Dracula
Sherlock
for one.
Holmes, Arsene Lupin, that type of thing. They will use
Yeah.
sort of those gray characters like the Shadow and John Carter and Tarzan, who I won't bore your audience, but there's a difference between something where the copyright's in the public domain and the trademarks in the public domain, but
Hmm.
they'll kind of tread that if they can. Um, so I was doing that for a little bit, and I still write for Black Coat. So I do their Tales of the Shadowman anthology every year. I do a contribution to it, and through writing for them, I had written one story involving the Emir from 20 Million Miles to Earth, and El Santo from, like, I don't know if you're a fan of
Oh
Mexican films.
yeah, yeah. I love
Yeah,
the Aztec mummy and right.
yeah.
Yes, yeah.
For anybody who doesn't know, like in Mexico, El Santo's he's like Superman and the character of The Rock combined in Mexico, like in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
So he was like a legit in quotes pro wrestler, but he would also do like B monster movies, but they're really fun. And
Oh
anyway, I
yes.
did a story for that, and they couldn't quite fit it into the Black Coat, so I submitted to G-Fan magazine, which is a fanzine for Godzilla fans, and they had picked it up, so they really liked the story there, and they asked me to do a couple more. So I did a couple more stories for them. They were at a time when they were shut down from using Godzilla in their like tales. So I was like, well, I can do stories with like Kong and Gamera and the Colossal Man, and I just drew on some of those other 50s movies. And I got to the point where I was also reading a lot of kaiju books. So I had read Jeremy Robinson's Project Nemesis. I don't know if you've read that or not.
Mm-mm.
Fantastic read, fantastic read. It's Jeremy's probably the top kaiju author there is out there.
Oh.
So if you have an opportunity, check out his Project Nemesis series. So he had put out request in the back of his books for fan art, and I can't draw to save my life. But I did reach out to him and said, hey, I do these short stories for different publications. And I said, GFan in particular has a mascot. They have a mascot monster called Gfantis. And I said, I think I could do a short story that takes place in between book 1 and book 2 of your series, where we do it like on a secluded island. So it's sort of a non-event, but it would be an excellent opportunity for both parties here to benefit, because GFan would have, the best, most well-known kaiju monster from novels appearing in their magazine, and then Jeremy will get the exposure of being in GFan to people who might not necessarily read as much because they're more movie fans, but they'll check out the magazine. So I wrote that with Jeremy. He really liked it, and then I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. I reached out to a couple other kaiju authors like Tim Price, who wrote Big in Japan, which is really fun,
Mm-hmm.
or Todd Tennant, who does the King Komodo online comic strip, and K.H. Kohler, who wrote a very neat kaiju book called Raiju. So I just did 4 stories for them for GFan and crossovers, and it was K.H. Kohler who had said to me, hey, you're pretty good at this. Do you want to give it a shot? The company I work for, Severed Press, is looking for more kaiju authors. So I honestly never thought that I was any good, but it was like, well, this opportunity presented itself, and I, never like to turn down an opportunity. So I figured, I'll take this challenge, see if I can't just write a book, even if it doesn't get picked up. At least I'll know that, like, I wrote a full length novel, and and see what happens. And it's really funny. I tell my this story all the time to embarrass my wife, but I had written Chimera Scourge of the Gods, and I had dedicated it to my two daughters because I thought that, like, oh, well, nobody can be mad if you dedicate a book to your daughters, right? Well, that was a mistake when I left my wife off of it. So, she had read the like the script I turned in, and we had like a bit of a fight. She's like, "Oh, you didn't put me in here." I was like, I didn't think it was like a big deal. I just like put the kids down because they're the kids." So anyway, I had like a really big drop the mic moment for myself the next day, where she's like, in the shower, and I like get the email from Separate Press that they really liked the book and wanted to pick it up. So I like walked into the bathroom and I was like, "Well, you may not have cared for the story, but Separate Press did. They just offered me a contract," and then left, which also didn't work out well for me to address the situation that way. But that was just a little bump in the road. It wasn't a big deal.
Did you put her in the next book?
Then? Oh, she's actually, the next book was dedicated to her.
And okay, I was just saying, yeah. And you got to put a character that's in here, like the most beautiful, compassionate, understanding person in the world.
Well, ironically, the book Chimera is very much based on myself. I guess I'll talk about that real quick and then tell you how it kind of snowballed from there. Sure. I'm not being too long-winded.
Yeah, we got time.
So Chimera, the idea behind it was, as a teacher, one thing that we learned is it's best if you can connect something to prior knowledge. People are more likely to engage in it, right? So if you can present a student with something that they already have some background about, they're more likely to be engaged by it. Which is why when I was writing Chimera, I was like, well, I want to use mythological creatures because most of my audience will have a background in these creatures, and either public domains, I can use them without like having a big issue about it. But I needed to make an original monster. So I was just kind of piecing things together in my head, and I wanted a very Kong-based monster. So that's kind of where Chimera came from. Whereas, and it's funny because I didn't realize it at the time, even though I knew it and people have pointed out to me in the past, is that Chimera is a hybrid combination of a mountain gorilla, an African lion, and a sperm whale. So he's got like basically the build of a gorilla, the skin and tail and face of a whale with the claws and hind legs, and the mane of a lion. And even though I knew it, but I didn't think at the time. People point out to me like, "Oh, that's a literal Gojira," because Gojira translate, which is the Japanese name for Godzilla, into gorilla whale. And it wasn't my intention, but it just kind of came out that way, and it worked. And I got the idea for the premise in that as a teacher of students with autism, we use a system called applied behavior analysis, which basically means that you try to set expectations, then you reward for those expectations. And then if you do that, whatever behavior you're looking for, the student will look to do more often. And I took my kids to see a circus, and they had a lion tamer there. And I was watching the lion tamer, and I was like, he's doing the same thing I'm doing, just on a more concrete level, meaning like instead of like giving out verbal praise reinforcement, it's like if the lion does something, they get a snack, and then it reinforces what they were to do. So I thought like, oh, that'd be kind of neat if I could take something I know a lot about in teaching and applied behavior analysis and hopefully apply it a cool way in a book to a monster. And then it wouldn't just be like the typical a monster's either self-driven, like Godzilla is in a lot of movies, or like piloting a mech type of thing. It'd be something a little bit different. So I wrote that story with a premise and that like the ancient gods in conjunction with like the Norse gods, the Greek gods, and the Mesopotamian gods were coming back to wipe out humanity, and they're using creatures they'd capture across the multiverse to do this, which are the monsters we know from mythology. And then Chimera was kind of like the answer to that. So he would go out and stop these monsters in conjunction with the government. But the person who was with him was a teacher of students with autism, who was like sort of an analog for myself, but a much like braver, cooler version of myself than I am in real life. And ironically, like the person's inspiration, Luke Davis, is his wife and his kids, which like are portrayed, like you had said, as like the most loving, compassionate people ever. Yeah. So my wife did go back and read the book. She was like, "Oh, okay, I get it now."
You're forgiven, finally, right?
Yeah, so that worked out. But Chimera did fairly well, and I didn't think anything of it. And Severed Press was like, "Hey, that's doing well. Do you got any other ideas?" And I wasn't prepared for that, but I thought, okay, well, if you want something else, I said I'd like to do something with cryptids for the same type of reason that I explained with mythological monsters, in that my fan base will have some idea of what they are, and I can have a little fun with it. So in this case, I wanted to do a story again with something I knew a lot about that I don't know the general public did, which is known as brain-based learning. So a very quick layman's explanation of that would be brain-based learning is the idea that the brain is like any other muscle, where if you use it a lot or use a certain aspect of it a lot, it'll strengthen that part of the brain. So a very easy understanding of is, I'm sure you've heard the term use it or lose it before. Like,
Right. Oh yeah.
in high school, we probably learned trigonometry that we don't remember anymore, right?
Right.
Because
Right. Exactly.
we don't use it. But I thought an interesting way to approach this would be, what if the characters we're looking at had to utilize the part of the brain that deals with emotion and caring for others. So I had picked characters who were from like a strong military background and loners, and they are basically going to, in this case, sort of like a Pacific Rim, sync with giant cybernetic birds that I'd called rocks for my book Operation Rock. And the first thought by the characters in the book is that, well, these people were pilots, so they should be able to handle this, until the idea comes around that, no, it's not their ability as pilots that makes them able to sync, it's their ability to connect with others, because they're connecting with this animal. But in order to do that, they had to build that strength up in themselves. So it was more like a character study interacting. And then for the villains, I had like sort of like an Indiana Jones type villain from Temple of Doom, where he captured the world's cryptids and he grew them up to kaiju size, and then they would attack various places, and I had these 4 rocks that could go and attack them. But I do get, it's not my most well-read book, but it's definitely my most well-reviewed book. When people go back and read Operation Rock, they like it the best. So anyway, but that was doing okay too. So this was like within 6 months now I'd written the 2 books, and Severed Press was like, well, and these are doing pretty good. What else do you got? And I was like, oh, geez, nothing. So anyway, I thought, well, what am I going to do here? And I said, you know what? I had this thing, because we talked about earlier, like I've always liked the 1950s movies for kaiju, like the Ray Harryhausen's and them and the Blob and all these other creature features I would see. And I thought, like, these are all monsters I always wanted to see Godzilla fight, but I never just got it, because it's hard to do things like that. And I thought, well, I can't do Godzilla, but I can make my own character who's like a Godzilla homage. So in this case, I made Atomic Rex. And, basically the premise of Atomic Rex is like, he's Godzilla and he lives in a world where there's all these homages to other monsters, again, like them. Or on the cover, I insisted to Separate Press, I was like, look, you got to put Atomic Rex fighting a giant turtle. And they were like, why? And I was like, just trust me, if you put it on the cover, people are going to buy it.
Right. Because that was, I mean, I can remember as a kid, like loving both Godzilla and Gamera. Like I
Right.
remember drawing Godzilla and Gamera fighting one another. Like
Yeah.
this just seemed the most natural thing to me in the world. Like, why have they not come together? I mean, they both have like fire,
Right.
for a breath. I thought that would be an awesome movie,
Yeah. It's a fan's dream matchup, right? I mean, we
Yeah,
all really want to see that.
exactly.
And so I wrote Atomic Rex, and in this case, it was just more of like an adventure story. It didn't have like a ton of the deep thought that I did in some of my other stories. Although it's always interesting, I find that people go back and fans are like, they'll put deep thought in response that I didn't think I put that much thought into, but they read more into it, which is great. I'm glad that they do.
Yeah. Isn't that
So anyway,
interesting
Atomic Rex.
when fans do that? I'm sorry, Matt.
No, go ahead.
Isn't that interesting when you get that feedback from readers, and they are seeing things that for them that are very significant and meaningful, but you didn't really intend for them to see. I mean, that's not a horrible thing, but I just, isn't that a fascinating
It was extremely fascinating. In particular, have you read Atomic Rex or no?
I have it. Sorry, I have not. I got a copy from you. I think I got a copy from you one year at G Fest, but I never did like.
It's okay. I just wondering. So I won't like spoil it for too many people, but there's
yes, please.
Several of the characters. I just wrote them as homages to different monsters, like I said, and some of the different monsters people really picked up on stuff. And they're like, oh, and I think that Matt really like went for like the darkest aspects of humanity in making this character, and really delved deep into it. And like you said, I didn't think I did. I am thrilled that fans make that connection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I got a lot of feedback about stuff like that, which is very interesting. And then too, like I got a lot of positive feedback on the two main characters for that story as well. For the most part, where the one guy's like a loner type guy, like from Operation Rock, and the female was like captured at first, sort of like an Andaro character, but I tried to make her kind of clever and active. So not just like, I love Fay Ray, but not just like screaming, type of thing.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you want her to be the savvy side of Fay
Yes.
Ray, because she's scrappy. I mean, she's trying to survive, and but yeah, but that was like also a trope of the time.
Right.
You couldn't have the heroine be too strong,
Right.
because then she wouldn't need the man to rescue her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I tried to make it where a lot of my books, one of the other positive feedbacks I get is that I don't do too many stories where it's like a will they won't they love story. Like I try to dive into stories where they're already a couple, and hopefully
Hmm.
that they're stronger based off of each other. It's because I've been dating my wife since I was 15. So now that I'm 42, it's been a long time since I had to go through a dating process.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think part of the genre, sometimes on certain genres, you just don't want to deal with it. I write
Yeah,
multiple genres, and it's romance is something I just don't want to deal with. I kind of take my cue about romance and those things from H.P. Lovecraft. When if there's a sexual union, then it's going to end up in like deformation, or someone's going to become a cannibal, or something's going to happen,
right.
and that's why, like, I just don't want to mess with it. Although it's funny, uh, I have a series where a couple characters, it's my cozy mystery streets, where the couple characters are just best friends. A guy, Abby, a main character, and her best friend Ray have been friends since childhood. And my reader response was, "So when are Ray and Abby getting together?" I'm like, "What do you mean? They're not." It was never my intention, but
Right.
readers and they saw that, they saw them as being very flirty, and to me, I was just like, "Wait a minute, they're like family." It's just like,
Yes.
but knowing that, I'm playing with those ideas in the second story just because they brought it up to me. I'm like, oh well, let's see what I can do with this. But I told them day one, like, they're not getting together, so no expectations. But no, I get that, and I like that. What that shows is that people are investing themselves into your story, into your characters, and then they care. I mean, they care about
Yeah.
these. They take on a reality that is because when you're writing, there's a level of reality. I mean, you're doing the act of writing. You're putting down word after word, and there's a conscious effort to do that. But there are times where it just kind of feels very natural and it comes out. But then when it's done, it's kind of like a magical thing has happened. Like, wow, I created this thing that kind of lives on its own in the minds of the readers, and that's the beautiful thing. That's where the beauty, I think, happens.
Oh, absolutely. When people ask me who are looking to be a writer, so I'll get that a lot where people reach out to me, "Hey, I want to be a writer. What can I do?" And I've known a few people who've come along and actually got something published, and to see how happy they are. And so I get it. I said, aside from holding my kids for the first time, like holding a book that I wrote in my hands, like you said, it's such a cool feeling. Like I created this, and I made this story up, and not only that, but people find it engaging and interesting. Um, for the most part, which is it's just a wonderful feeling that can't be described. Um,
Hmm. Oh yeah,
so
no, I
yeah.
totally agree. So, um, what to you now, what makes a good kaiju story? Like when you're considering a kaiju story, because we're going to get into your writing and your process and those kinds of
Sure.
things, but I mean, I'm assuming you write this genre because of your lifelong love of monsters, and like you said, you started writing these stories with your brother. But so, what makes a good kaiju story to you?
Well, to me, like I said, I think that the monsters have to have some kind of personality. They can't just be necessarily a monster on the loose. So there's a difference. It's why I think that, say, like Godzilla '98 didn't resonate with a lot of fans because it doesn't have a lot of personality to it. So your monster can't just be a monster in a kaiju story. It's got to be a character. So it's got to have something that's relatable to it. It's one reason that I gravitate to Kong a lot is because Kong is very much almost like one shade away from being human. He's like even more
Right.
than a gorilla.
Exactly.
He's close. So for my books, like with Chimera, I really try to give him a personality where I equate him to being like a 4-year-old child in terms of mental ability. So he's not just reacting, but he's processing and he's thinking and he's making connections both intellectually and emotionally with the other characters.
Hmm.
And then even something like Atomic Rex, I try to really give him a mindset of where, yes, he's very territorial, but you'll also see him problem solve in a few cases. And sort of like the Heisei Godzilla, like for fans who might not know, like the 90s Godzilla, where like he's not necessarily good or evil, but he can certainly determine when something is a threat. And then maybe if something's not quite a big a threat, he'll decide to work with it to destroy the bigger threat. So again, trying to give
Right.
that personality.
There was
I
still
do
an
think,
instinctual intelligence
yeah,
there.
exactly.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
No, I get it.
yeah, and then I think you also need engaging human characters as well. So you can't just have um, the monsters and not have like human characters that are interesting or that grow over time.
Hmm.
But that's pretty much a trope for any type of writing, right? Where like you want to have a character who you see growth in that character, both in the story and then if you're lucky enough across multiple stories.
Yeah, and I think it's the beauty of the series format. You know,
Right.
I always loved series as a kid, and like my three main book series right now are my two pulps are at least three books,
Mhm.
and my cozy's a four story arc. I knew from the get go it's just four stories, so I created a longer story arc between the four stories. Each individual story is self-contained, but there are connections, continuity to all four
Right.
of them, and you want that sense of story arc. Um, and with pulps by nature are just going to keep on going. I mean,
Right.
Tarzan, there's just adventure after adventure after adventure.
Right.
I'm not sure if there's a whole lot of what we would call growth in that character or change,
Right.
but he's just in that adventure. And no, I totally get that. So what, now that you've done so much in the kaiju genre, are there any other genres that you would like to try next or at some time?
Yeah, I've kind of explored trying to do more of the superhero genre. So I did do kind of a bunch of very short stories with a character called Raptor, who's sort of like a Batman analog, but he's also got like a little bit of like Power Rangers mixed into him and a little bit of Iron Man. So I did a couple short stories with him, and then I really went full in. It's sort of like a soft reboot. It does still connect to the two stories I had self-published when I got Raptor picked up by a publishing company for a horror story called Raptor Retribution of the Revenants. So I really tried to make that more of a like a mystery story with some horror elements to it. So you'll see different tropes appear in there. The very basic premise is that Retribution is again like a goddess who comes to the city and is reanimating people who are killed and then letting them kill whoever they hold responsible for their death, whether it's justified or not.
Okay.
Which is where the hero has to step in. So I try to make it like a morality play where it's like there's a difference, the classic difference between justice and vengeance. But you can kind of see like where sometimes these people are coming from. Um, like maybe somebody wasn't directly responsible for the murder, but their negligence led to it. So, might have been like, I didn't overtly kill this person. Sort of like, yeah, the Spider-Man causing his Uncle Ben's death.
Right, and sometimes all evil needs to flourish is for good people to do nothing.
Exactly,
Exactly. Yeah, the
exactly.
apathy can lead to a world of harm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I did that one, and then I was recently approached by Raventail Publishing to really kind of expand their new horror branch into creature features. So I wanted to do that again, kind of like with a little bit of mix of heroic stuff into it. So I did Agent 666
Hmm.
is one of the first book I did for them,
It's a great
and
cover, great title.
oh, thank you. Yeah, and the basic premise of the story is there was a child who's possessed by a demon, kind of like the Exorcist type deal. But in this case, the priest could not force this demon out of him because the demon was too powerful. But they do have, did some research and found different holy relics, and one of them was called the Chains of Saint Peter, which you guys can look up. It's kind of a long backstory, but they're holy relic chains. And anyway, I thought it'd be a neat idea of what if throughout time there was people who could not have demons removed from them, but by tying these chains around them, the demon could be bound to them. So the demon becomes bound to the person, sort of like Etrigan from DC. So he can like call the demon out. He can also use the chains as like a weapon, like Scorpion or Spawn. But in
Sure.
this case, whenever the chains unwrap from his arm physically, it gives the demon more space in his head mentally.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
kind of like a balance
Oh,
where,
wow. So it's, yeah, you've got this Faustian kind of issue, like,
yes,
and it's this always that sense of like, look, I need to do this sometimes, but the more I do it, the worse it's going to get for me.
right,
So
right,
that's always that continual sacrifice on the part of the hero, sacrificing himself for the greater good.
yes, yes.
Oh, I
And
like that. That's
yeah,
good.
I thought it was a cool concept. So I like to play that. And
Yeah.
then on top of it, I like to put in there where this character, he has love interest and early on finds out that she's pregnant. And then he's like, is this my kid? Is this a demon kid? Like, should I let this kid come into the world? So his mental struggles with this doubt about what kind of father he'll be, what the kid will be like, allows the demon in his mind even more freedom. So he's dealing with, I always try to put a lot of high actions in my stories. He's dealing with like,
Yeah.
threats, but at the same time, he's got this mental struggle going on, which is interesting to do. And then I did a book called The Final Host for them, which I tried to, like you had said, I want to see a continuation of Shin Godzilla, and so did I. So I tried to make that one sort of like similar themes to Shin Godzilla without having Shin Godzilla. So it kind of starts where Shin Godzilla ends, but with a totally different character. And instead of like natural organism, it's got to do with nanobots. And then it kind of expands out from there. I don't want to spoil too much about it,
Oh
but
no, that
yeah,
sounds interesting. Yeah, all those concepts. I mean, you are just going busy, busy, busy. So you have so many series going on, so many ideas. What I'd like to get into is this concept of world building, because it's great to
sure.
have action and great to have characters, but the characters need to have a world in which to live. So how do you go about designing your worlds?
Good question. Whenever somebody asks me this question, I tell them the first thing I do is to set up the physics of the world. So for instance, a good example would be, let's just take Superman, okay? So in the real world, Superman lived in our world. The laws of physics say that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if Superman hits like a building that he can knock down, which he can, in theory, he should be pushed backwards the opposite way with as much force as he hits the building with. But of course, that makes for difficult storytelling. So I try to set it up where fans can understand that this is how physics operate in this world, so that if something really large enacts force on something else, we won't necessarily see that pushback just because it makes for odd storytelling, or the way that I use radiation or energy blast and stuff like that. It's important, I think, to set those parameters. To give an example from the Kaiju genre, like if you're using Gamera, for the most part, Gamera is using like plasma blast, where it's just like fire,
Yeah.
which is destructive. But Godzilla is using like a radioactive blast.
Yeah, like a
So
beam,
yeah,
right? It seems to
yes,
go much farther. Gamera's, at least the the Showa Gamera had that like a almost like getting a nozzle of hairspray and a
right,
lighter, and getting this burst of flame, whereas in the 90s trilogy it was like almost like a ball, or yeah, the plasma
yes.
coming out. Yeah.
And then, of course, if Godzilla's giving out a radioactive blast, like you had mentioned, GMK does a good job of showing that it's not just the blast itself; it's the fallout from it that's an issue.
Right.
So I
Right.
think when you're writing a monster, that's one of the most important things to establish, is that this is how physics will work in this world. Then the second thing I try to do is to establish the monster's personality and hopefully growth. So Chimera is a great example of growing because he's a creature who learns. So I try to make it where, like, as this series goes on, you can see that he's more intelligent than he was at the beginning. So that's one of the things I like to do with the world building. I also take the approach in most of my stories of starting small and building out. So like we'll kind of start with a story that's localized to an area, and that area could be comparative. So like in some cases, the area is the entire Earth, okay? But then in future stories, we'll see different planets or different dimensions interacting. Or an example would be like in Atomic Rex, book one predominantly takes place in a post-apocalyptic world in North America. Then book 2 takes place in what's going on in South America, and then it branches out kind of from there. So I like to do the give you a piece of the world and build out. And you know, other authors who kind of like to say this is my entire world and then zero in on a character. I find that a more difficult way to write. So I try to do like smaller and then build out.
Okay, that makes sense. So is
Yeah.
there a particular aspect of your world that you like the most?
Yeah, I particularly like if I can do two things, I would say.
Yeah.
For one, to connect it to things that I have a high degree of knowledge about. Like I've already mentioned that I'll try to connect, aspects of education and teaching I know into it, which I find fun. For the most part, I think my fans do. I will get some good positive feedback on that. And then the other part, I don't know if you do this too, but a lot of other writers I do know is I'll put aspects of myself and people around me into my characters, which is interesting because not only does it give a chance for me to tell a story sort of about myself, but it also works as a mirror where like I can look at a character and say, what flaws do I have? And can I put them into this character? And then hopefully as the character builds, I can recognize what does this character need to do to overcome these flaws? And then conversely, what do I need to do as a person? Because this is, an exaggerated example of me, but these are still flaws that I might have and might recognize in myself and try to look, how can I overcome these flaws? Obviously, it won't be like fighting giant monsters, but like we
Right.
can find other ways to do it.
No, yeah, exactly. I think all writing eventually is and ultimately is going to be cathartic in some ways, shape, or form. So, uh, and my I inject some of myself in most of my characters, or at least the main ones, like Abby from the Cozy Mystery. There's a
Mhm.
lot of parallels. She found herself out of a job and she was depressed, and so it enabled me to kind of. That's how I was feeling after I was done teaching. I'm like, it kind of allowed me to kind of work through that depression in a way that was very cathartic and kind of healing. And a lot of stuff came into Gage Black, my splatter western. There was pulling in reservoirs of what I love about revenge so much and the purity
Right,
of hate, but allowed me to kind of just vomit it all out in a
right,
way that was just very, very cathartic. And like, yeah, this is me on the page here. So I think no matter what we write, we always bring something to ourselves or of ourselves to the page, or people we know. In the Cozy, they're the grandma figures based totally on my grandma Justice,
right.
and that relationship that she and Abby have mirror the one that I had with my grandma. And so writing those scenes, she had been gone for several years. Writing those scenes was very bittersweet. I found myself smiling as much as crying because
Right.
I felt her so close to me, in those times. And I could hear her saying, now, Mark Allen, don't tell all my stories. So it was very, but that wouldn't happen if it was wholesale fiction. You have to,
Right.
when you're inventing something, you don't have the emotional component. So I think it's important, especially in the type, if we're writing characters to make them believable, or in a genre that we're trying to delve into those realms of emotional, or the connections, relationships, we have to pull from ourselves to make it believable, because that's all we have to base on. I mean, we could twist it, change it, but the core, I think, has to come from us.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, so that'll be how I world build. Like start with the physics, design a monster, look for character traits within myself that I can utilize, and then look to build out. And then, like I said, a lot of times I will go with prior knowledge if I can. So that's why you'll see things like mythological monsters and cryptids and homages appear in a lot of my books
Mhm.
because it's A, already stuff I know, and B, hopefully things that most of my fans will recognize and know, or at least recognize like, oh, this is like a homage to Gamera or whatever that I'm
Sure.
going for.
Right, right. Well, we touched a little bit about that, how you said you brought a little of yourself into these characters, even your parts where you're not, don't like. But when you come up with your human characters, uh, what's the process like for you? Like, are you simply filling in like, well, I need some military people, I need this, or is there a separate process you go through when creating your human characters?
No, it's a good question. I guess it depends on the story. So in some cases, yes, I do need particular characters to fill a role, like a military character or something like that. So I'll build them up from there. In some cases, it'll be I had a small role in mind for a character, and as I was writing the character, I really fell in love with the character, and it has expanded outward from there. So like a good example would be from my first Chimera book. Allison is a nymph who becomes one of the main villains of that book, and then spreads across through multiple books. And that was never my intention. I'd only intended to use her for like part one of the first Chimera book. But as I was writing her, I was like, I really like this character, and fans caught on to her too. Like I just used her in the last Atomic Rex and Chimera book I did, which are even crossovers with other characters. And the fans really have liked her journey as well. Even though she's a villain, they still like her journey. So
Villains are
actually, for this,
fun. Villains are great characters.
oh, they're the best.
I
Yeah,
mean, they're the most fun to write, I think, because they don't have the bounds that limit them, like the history, the heroes. I mean, that's there's a liberation and a freedom that comes with writing a really good villain. Um, and they're just kind of delicious is a good word I like to use to describing
that's a good
writing them.
term. Yeah,
And as was like in my last book, which was a pulp, my homage to the Phantom, called Death's Head, where there's the villain. It was like I knew what the villain was. I had a name. I kind of had an idea about this villain, and I wrote down all my notes. But then I didn't really fully know this villain until the first line of dialogue came out of his mouth. And then I'm like, oh yeah. And then from that point, like I was like so loving writing this character. And that's when I
yeah,
knew like this book is not going to end with this character, with this villain being killed, or like, no, 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 no. This villain has to live on because the villain's too much fun to write. You don't always get a great villain. I mean,
right,
that's why you can't kill the Joker in the very first story. I mean,
right.
they keep on trying to kill him off in the Batman movies, but as a necessary means, like, boy, it's hard to come up with a really good villain, especially a great foil for your main character. So no, I totally get that.
So yeah, that's kind of like so sometimes I will make a character where like I want them to fit a particular trope. Oftentimes it might be more like I want a character who can express certain viewpoints or emotions. So like I'll develop a character um, for that. And usually I'll kind of think of where do I want this person to be in terms of their life? Like, are they a younger person who's just starting out? Are they an older person? Are they a parent? Are they somebody like myself who's, got my kids to take care of, but also my elderly parents at this point, and go from there so I can explore that character a little bit. And then like the villains, I really like writing the villains. And I think that the best villains are the most empathetic ones. I'm sure you would agree with that. Like I've always thought that one of the best villains ever is Magneto from the X-Men.
Yes.
Because if you look back, you can kind of see where he's coming from. You might
Sure.
disagree with
You
his
get it.
methods,
You
but
understand. Even
yeah,
Thanos, I think, even though
right.
he's a lot more, some people say he's cruel, he's being cruel to be kind. Like,
Yes,
look,
yes,
man, we've screwed things up. We got to fix this. We got to right the ship. It's a drastic thing, but someone's got to do it. No, I totally agree with Magneto. I've always thought the character was very sympathetic. And when you find out his backstory, it's like, yeah, man, I get it, man. It's no different than any other oppressed minority trying to fight for freedom, trying to fight for
exactly.
recognition and equality. So immediately your heart goes out to him.
So I try to do that with villains. I try to make again the Allison character is very sympathetic because she was in the storyline she was a nymph, and in mythology the nymphs are used as little more than slaves to the god's whims for multiple purposes, and that's what like makes her angry, makes her want to turn things over. So
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people say, like, no, I can see where she's coming from. Like if
Yeah.
I was in that position for millennia, I would be pretty angry too.
Sure.
So that's yeah, that would be how I develop the characters.
Okay. Which of your characters would you most like to have a drink with?
That's a good one. Ooh, let me think about that one. It wouldn't be Luke from Chimera because that's basically me. I think the character I would okay. Here's a good one. So the character I'd most like to have a drink with would be the Emily character from my later Atomic Rex books, because Emily is Chris's daughter, the main character. So I don't super see Chris as like a reflection of myself, but I've kind of written Emily as a reflection of where I see my daughter when she's older, so I can kind of see trajectory she's on, and I
Sure.
think this is where she's going. So I'm in no rush to get there. Like I don't want to rush her growing up.
Right,
Um,
right.
but I feel like that would be really cool.
But
So
just
like
kind of
I
knowing she's gotten there and being able to, when you're looking forward to when you're able to talk with her as that adult, although
yes.
you're not ready for it to happen. You're like, no, we can enjoy the ride. It'll happen soon enough.
Exactly.
I
But
get it.
if I could take this analog for her at that time, I think that'd be a really cool thing to do.
Okay, nice, nice. Well, you've I want to talk about creative process, which you've been talking about this entire time, starting
Mhm.
small, building out, all these different things. So is there anything else about the creative process that you can talk about, or I
Yeah.
mean, to go from like beginning of the idea to finished product?
Yes. Something I'll always tell people is two components. When I'm writing, like right now, I'm doing a couple different projects, and my goal is to write 1,000 words a day, no matter what that is. And I will tell people, do not be frustrated if you decide this 1,000 words sucks, and I'm just going to throw it out. Right? I'm sure you've done that too, right? Where you've written like
Hmm.
a section of a book and like, no, this is
Yeah,
terrible.
you know it's not going to
Um,
work, but it doesn't matter because you have to write it out, because what that could be blocking the creative process. And you could always know, look, this may not work for this, but you know what? I could probably cannibalize this for something else later on.
yeah,
At least
exactly.
you're getting the chops. You're getting
Mhm.
yourself in that habit.
Exactly. So it's getting your mind flowing, and you're putting things down, and it's okay to see things that don't work. I think another big aspect of writing in the process is you kind of need to have as little ego as possible. It's easy to say be egoless, but I can remember my brother's also a writer. He does not write as much as me, which I always let him know, because we're brothers. But
Right. You have to. You have to be a good brother in that way, right?
yeah, but
Is
I
he
can
older
still
or
recall like,
younger? Younger or
yeah,
older?
sorry,
Is he older or younger?
he's younger than me, so I
Younger.
definitely have to
Okay.
stomp him down.
Yeah, of course. That's what an older brother's supposed to do. Of,
Yeah.
of course.
Um, but he's a fantastic a resource for me. Where I can remember when I wrote my first book, and I said, like, you take a look at this. He said, I love it, but he said the first chapter sucks. He's like, you got to go back and review the first chapter, and it's not an easy thing to hear. But
Hmm.
you do need to take that and be like, okay, this is something I need to get better at. Or
Right.
another good example would be kind of even post when I'm done writing a book. I will go back and check out fan reviews. So in some cases, sometimes some people, and it's okay, they'll be like, oh, this book just sucks. And I'm like, okay, it just wasn't for them. In other cases, people will point out things like, oh, I wish that Dennion had done this more. I wish that he had worked on, as a good example, like grammar and syntax. My first books and spelling, they're not as strong as they should have been. But I took that to heart, and I was like, okay, this is a valid criticism. I can't like be mad about it. It's a valid criticism,
Right.
and I'll try to use it to go back. And I have thankfully seen fans say like, oh, I can see an improvement from his first books in these areas. But I think that's definitely part of the parts of the process is like you've got to keep yourself moving. Writer's block can happen. Just got to keep trying to push through it. You've got to be willing to have your work reviewed both in the process, if you have friends that can do it, or certainly if you're working for a publisher, they're going to come back and say, hey, you might need to improve this or that, or
Hmm.
build up this section. And you've got to be willing to do that. I've had people, they've asked me as a favor to edit something for them, and I'll say like, I think this part's no good, and they get really mad at me about it. But I try to tell them, like, hey, I'm just trying to help you out. I'm
Yeah.
not trying to do
Yes.
this
And you have to have a thick skin as a
yeah.
writer. I mean, I I went through my undergraduate degrees in creative writing, so you go through plenty of those creative writing workshops, and you learn to have a thick skin. Not in a way that where you're resistant to it, but like it doesn't affect you emotionally. If the criticism is coming from a good place and someone who wants
Right.
your success, and if it's someone you trust, then you have to take it in, because so it's easy to get too close to a work, you know.
Yes.
and
Yes.
and that's why I love about my reader team. I've got a good 5 or 6 people who always read my drafts. Like, I write the draft, I let it sit, I do my revision, then I send it out to my advanced team. And like with the last book, I knew my good friend Eric gave me feedback on it, and he's like, he started off with like, look, you're a really good writer. I'm like, and I'm waiting to hear the but,
Yeah.
because I knew there was one chapter, there were 2 things that I did that I knew, like, okay, I did this like one chapter, I don't think I like it, I don't think it fits. And then there was a decision I made about a choice in the plot, and he called me on those 2 things. And I didn't say anything until he was all done, and I said, those are the 2 things that I wasn't sure about.
Right.
um that because really stuck out to me. So then I made the revisions based on it. I removed an entire chapter from the story because it just doesn't fit. And then I changed a major plot line which can change basically, basically the trajectory of the rest of the story.
Right.
But it made for a better story. So, I appreciate that kind of feedback because Eric's a good writer. He's written for a long time, a lot of different
Mm.
genres, and he likes pulps. He loves all these things. So I trust his voice, to give me that feedback and what's needed. And he knows he can be honest with me because, like, I
Right.
can take it. It's like it's a respect thing. Um, I don't. I don't like you. It's like my ego's not here. I'm not competing with anyone. And
Right. Exactly.
if
Yeah.
something's garbage, then tell me so I can make it not garbage. You know,
Yeah.
that's the whole point. Yeah.
And I often use the analogy when people ask me, I tell them, I feel like being a writer is like being a golfer. It's something you never master, but you can get better at it as you go.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah. Every
Um,
book you should be a little better. You should feel more confident
yeah.
in your prose and your ability to
Mhm.
tell a story.
And it'll usually be reflected. And if you do get positive feedback, people are like, oh, I really liked how you did this, then
Mhm.
definitely take validation from that and look to build off it going forward,
Sure.
Like from day one, I've always been told, like, oh, Matt, you write really graphic and engaging fights. I'm like, okay, well, that's something I'll build off of then. I try to go from
Right.
there.
And in your genre, you want that. I mean,
Yes.
because the
Yeah.
fans are going to want to read that.
Yeah, that's what they're there for. Like you want to build a good story around it, but sort of like the meat of that story is going to be like, oh, I want to see monster fights. So that's the
Exactly.
thing.
Right. And that was going back to my criticism of Shin Godzilla. It's like,
Yeah, exactly.
do
Yes.
something, man. Don't just stand there, Right, right. Well, let's talk about your organization a little
Sure.
bit. Are you a pantser or a plotter?
What do you mean by those two terms? Sorry.
Well, when you organize, so the term pantser means someone who sits down and writes a book without really. They have an idea about what they want. They might have an idea about the end or the beginning, but they develop as they go. They're writing by the seat of their pants. That's
Oh,
just
that's
called a
definitely what
pantser.
I do.
A
Yeah.
plotter, a plotter is someone like me who writes down ideas, develops those ideas, puts them in an outline, and I have my outline here. Like with my, sometimes I color code it, and I have, my current outline for my current book is like 23 pages, 26 pages, something like that. Still, it sounds like a lot, but I'm writing a 400-page book, maybe 450. So there's still a lot of like room for that invention and
Right.
intention and discovery and all those things that have to happen. So you are within a pantser. You just sit down,
Oh,
I have an
definitely.
idea, and then you just start
Yeah.
writing.
Yeah. I just try to go from there. It's probably how I just approach life in general. Haven't taken a lot of courses in psychology and stuff to become an educator. And we learn about different personality types. So I'm definitely the type of personality where it's just like, yeah, I'll give this a shot and see where it goes.
That's
Uh,
great. That's great.
yeah.
Very
Um,
freewheeling.
yeah, I try. Sometimes it doesn't work out. I don't mean to sound like it's always it works all the time.
No, no, but
Um,
if that's your process, see, that's true to who you are, and that's the thing. Like I spent, decades in academia as a student, as an instructor. I taught English,
mhm,
so I taught my students how to organize because academic writing, as you know, has to
yes.
be cogent paragraphs all forming a coherent paper. And so I taught them how to structure a paper. I taught them the importance of outlining and say, look, the more you do on your outline, the easier your drafting will be, which
Right.
in that case is true. I keep doing that because for me that helps my process.
Right.
The thought of now I have approached writing short stories as basically a pantser because you've got maybe 5,000 words or something like that. You can just hit the ground running and just go to town. But when you're looking at 100,000 words, that's a different animal, at least for me.
Yeah.
You know.
I find I think sort of like you, I do have to do like a lot of academic writing too. So it might be why I take the Panther approach when I'm doing my fictional writing, because then I don't have to use that style. And
Yeah.
I also find uh, I like to say I'm not always sure where the story is going to take me. So a lot of times, like I'll have like a rough idea, and like I said, like with the one character in the Chimera stories, like I wasn't planning to use that character, but it's like I feel like this character is taking me into a direction where she's going to be more involved. So we'll do that. And that's kind of where I go because I and again it's different. I'm not meaning to shoot anybody down who uses
No,
different.
no,
Yeah, yeah.
that's the thing.
It's not at all.
That's what I
Um,
like about the show, Matt. One of the reasons why I started doing it is that I've met so many wonderful writers like through Instagram and other friends who write, and I find that it's fascinating how everyone kind of has a different way of doing it. We all kind of get to the same place at the end, but the way we get there, it's just wildly different, you know. And like me, I love a GPS, you know. Before, back in the
Yeah.
day when I traveled, I had an atlas, you know. And some people are just like, we're just going to hit the road and just see where the hell we go, you know.
Yeah.
So this is like one of the most exciting things about doing this interview format for me, is interviewing writers like yourself, who I've known your work for years because of GFest.
Yeah.
And it's just like, just learning about you as a writer, because I know I'm not the only one who does it. It's like, some people think, you know, I get anxious when I hear about the people who pants the whole novel. I'm like, I just can't, my brain just like starts like flopping around like a trout out of water. But when I tell them my process, I could see the same reaction on them. They're like,
Oh
oh,
yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I could never oh my God, I could never, you know, I can see this visceral like
Yeah.
horror come across their face. So that's what I find fascinating, is like everyone's got a different process, and just talking about it, I find just uniquely wonderful. You
It's
know?
very cool. I'm sure as a kid you've seen this too, where people learn in different formats. So like for the longest time, I always thought that like when I was in school, that things were like you'd have a competition was like a great way to get people and get students engaged and reinforce them because it's fun. Until I became an educator, I was like, wait, there's some people who really hate competition and it scares
Sure.
them. So it's not the best
Yeah.
way for them.
It's that
Um,
performance anxiety, right?
right,
We're being
exactly.
judged,
Yeah,
and right. No, yeah, it's a very different kind of thing. It's probably some kind of authoritative, you know, a parent or
right.
parental figure, or religious, you know, a god or something like that. It's probably connected all kinds of psychosocially into those kinds of things.
I do think though this might be an interesting aspect of storytelling. So one of the reasons that I take the Panther approach is like I'll have in my head certain key points I want to hit in the story. Like I want these scenes to be in the story, and then I'll just fill in how I get there. Um, Prior to when I was born, my dad was actually enhancement talent for pro wrestling.
Nice.
He wouldn't really know him. He was just like would be, some mass due to different things. But anyway, he would always say like pro wrestling is telling a story too, and maybe not in what we traditionally think, but they are. And he would say like a lot of times, wrestlers would go into a match, and because he was the enhancement talent, it'd be like, okay, we're going to hit like this spot and this spot and this spot is my finisher. And then we'll just kind of fill it in as we go. So like that kind
Hmm.
of stuck with me, and I thought, well, I can use that because like I know I want like this battle and this battle and this battle to take place in my story, and then I'll kind of fill in the rest of it on the fly as we go.
Yeah.
So that might be where it comes from. And then like having heard him say that, like we'd watch wrestling too, because again, Saturday you're watching wrestling and then monster movies, right? or vice
Right.
versa.
No, I get it. I grew up watching wrestling too. I went to see
Yeah.
wrestling live. Actually, I did some wrestling when I was in grad school.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my friend Ted Hobgood ran the East Coast Wrestling Federation out of Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay.
And so when we went to school together, so I was, he invited me down to be a wrestler, but I didn't want to put my body through all that.
Right.
But my character was going to be like the professor. I was going to wear like a graduation gown and my big giant paddle, and that was the Board of Education,
Oh, like
and with my patented finishing move was the final exam. Like you failed,
great.
I mean, it just kind of writes itself,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I'm like, and so I got it, and there was one where we were wrestling, and we kind of had worked out what was going to happen, because you do. I mean, in the
Yeah.
clutches, you can say, okay, I'm going to do this, and you kind of go with it. Invent as you go. So I get that, but you have to be careful with two people. It doesn't always work out, because there was
Right.
I was picked up a chair to hit him in the back, and he stood up when he wasn't
Oh.
supposed to. So when I belted him, I mean, I clunked him, you know, and he hit him in the head, and he kind of went down for a little bit. So I had to kind of just preen, like
Yeah.
waiting for him to like not be so dizzy, like, oh man, I'm sorry, man, I really. And he knew he stood up. He wasn't supposed to, because I had it aimed right between the shoulders, like right in this where I'm supposed to, in the meat of the back. And then once he recovered, then he was able to, because I even pulled out my I had the foreign object, I did the whole thing. I think it was like a wad of paper with some like aluminum foil, wrapped around
Yeah.
it, but then he was able to like finally come to his senses, and then we finish the fight. But no, that makes perfect sense. Now, to me, now I get it. Now I understand that concept when you put it in the terms of wrestling.
Yes, there you
Now
go.
suddenly pantsing makes so much more sense
Yeah,
in a way. So thank you for that.
sure, sure.
Yeah, I don't feel nearly as freaked out by it anymore. So, do you do research for your books, and if so, like what kinds?
Oh, ton of research, ton of research. Because again, a lot of my books will include things that are already established, mythological creatures, cryptids, whatever the case might be. So yeah, a lot of research. In fact, I can remember doing a lot of research for all the Chimera stories. Like I had a good background in mythologies because I'm a fan of it, but I did have to go back and look at different monsters and stuff. And like a lot of times, monsters will be portrayed differently depending on whatever you're pulling mythology from. Like an example would be the Kraken. Okay, pretty well known. I mean, I originally saw it in Clash of Titans. I thought it
Clash
was
of
a great
Titans. I
monster.
know
Yeah,
what. Yeah, exactly. I can still see it coming out of the water. I mean,
yeah.
it's a beautiful monster, right?
And then turn out that it's there's the idea that it's based in giant squids, so it's
Yes,
kind of like a tentacled monster.
right.
And even some of the original mythology, if you go back even further, it's described more as like a giant crab. So I kind of went with like
Well,
that aspect when I did it in
nice.
my story. For Operation Rock, I did a lot of research on different cryptids, which is fun. And I reached out to a couple different cryptozoologists who were super nice and got back to me. And like, oh yeah, this is like, I live in Jersey, so I had like a good amount of knowledge of the Jersey Devil.
Sure.
But there's other things like the Scape or Lizard Man. Like I can only find a little bit on it online, but people
Hmm.
were willing to fill it in, which was very cool. And then for anything I do, it's a homage. Like Atomic Rex is a very homage. I had to go back and look up like what are some of the characteristics that like the ants in them had, because I have a characters called the Colony, which is a stand-in for them, which was neat. That's all very fun research. And then, like I said too, because I do try to incorporate, at least in layman's terms, some things I've learned as an educator, I'll have to go back and research them to like applied behavior analysis.
Sure.
Or brain-based learning, and then make sure that I'm explaining it in a way that hopefully my readers can engage in.
Right. And it
Um,
doesn't come off sounding like a lesson. Yes,
exactly,
you have to
exactly.
know the information and give it in ways that just seems effortless. Right. And I think as educators, we for me doing research, I really like that aspect of it because
Yeah.
that I didn't really do any research for my first book, I don't think. No, I did. I had to look up some spices and where they came from, what they were like. But for my pulp western, because or splatter western, it takes place right after the Civil War. So I was looking at weapons and mail routes,
Mhm.
Pony Express and stops along the way, and a little bit about Arizona and what was going on out in Arizona right after the war, and just those little details, so that when I talk about the weapon that he's going to use, it's accurate. Because if someone who's a historical fiction reader,
Yes.
they like say, oh, that revolver didn't come out until 1872. You can't have, I wanted to make sure in those years that I was writing, here's what was reality. So I totally get that.
Yeah, another thing I have to research a lot is geography, because I'm doing giant monsters tales. It takes place in different parts of the world, and I want to, make sure that if I'm writing something that takes place in Dallas, Texas, that I know kind of what the area is like, and I'm not just, throwing it out there, because people will definitely call you out on that.
Oh yeah,
Um,
right. If you're going to say this is on Fourth Street, you're going to say there's no Fourth Street in Dallas, right?
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 Yes.
Yeah. Oh no, no, totally, totally. Yeah, and thankfully we have wonderful search tools that will allow us to do those kinds of
Oh my
things. And
gosh. Yeah.
the world is at our fingertips,
Yeah.
which is a beautiful thing. No, I totally get that.
It must have been much harder pre-internet days. I can't imagine how
Yeah.
people got through.
Well, you go to the library and you get a card catalog, and you
Yeah.
go find these and you do the hard research. Um, yeah, and I know friends who write fantasy specifically because they don't want to do that research. They want to be able
Oh,
to invent stuff because they're like, no, 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 I don't want to bother with it. I don't want to find what's real. And
right.
so, but they just create wholesale, like whatever the world reality is, they just invent it as they go. And so, and I said, well, as long as it's consistent with itself, you can say anything and
Right.
it'll fit. Like these aquatic horses come out of the water and they can form trees. Okay, whatever,
Right.
that's great. We accept it, and as long as it's consistent with itself, you just go with it. Um, yeah. Do you have a favorite time of day that you like to write?
Yeah, I'm a bit of an insomniac, so I usually write at night when I can't sleep. So if I can't
Hmm.
sleep, I'll sneak out of bed, make sure I don't wake my wife up, and then I'll write then. I have two young girls, so like it's hard to write sometimes in the middle of the day when I get home.
Sure.
Or like right now we're recording this, which is right after work for me. Sometimes I'll stay a little bit later if I can and work because it's
Yeah.
not as distracting. But that would be the answer to that question. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I'm an insomniac too. It's unpleasant, but I'm trying to sleep. There are parts of me where like you should go right. I'm like, I don't want to be up. I've only had 3 hours of
Right.
sleep. I'm trying to rest, but I totally get it. But speaking of distraction, do you like listen to music or anything or television while you write, or do you like it completely silent?
No, I can have background music because I don't always write late at night. So a lot of times, like now the kids are doing whatever, watching TV, and the dog's barking, and 1,000 other things are going on. So I'm able just to kind of get that stuff done if I need to.
Mhm.
Um, it's usually not that I can't focus then on what I'm writing. It's just that I get a dad before like whatever, so I have to like break across and go do it.
Right.
Um, so no, just distractions aren't tough for me. But again, I work with students in autism, so like there's always a lot of distracting stuff going on in
Yeah.
school.
No,
So
I get it. That's interesting. Because I like having I have a specific music. I don't like anything with words. I want to hear
mhm,
soundtracks or like 30s music with vibraphone or depending on what I'm writing. But I kind of need to know that I'm going to have a time without distraction. Like that's in my mind, my mental space, it gets me into a better place creatively. If I think I only have like 90 minutes, you got to do something in an hour and a half. Part of me says, well, it's just not enough time. Like
right,
I mean, I know I can write in an hour, but part of me that and I have to probably just squish it down, saying, look, you may not always have the luxury of this, having a four
right.
hour block to write. So use the time that you have wisely. Yeah. Um, Tell me how you felt seeing your book in print for the first time. The very first book, like when you first held it in your hands, what did that feel like for you?
Oh my gosh, I think I mentioned before. Next to holding my kids for the first time, it was probably the coolest thing I've ever held in my hands. I can remember Chimera Scourge of the Gods was the first book I wrote, and I can remember like opening up the box when it came in and being like, I wrote this. It was a validation for sure, because I never thought that I'd be good enough to finish a book, let alone get it published and out there. So, it's a very validating and reinforcing feeling, and uh, it's accomplishing something I never thought I could do. So it was very cool. It was a very good feeling. I can't describe it any other way to people. It's very hard. I'm sure right? Like when you first get it, you're like,
Yeah, it's weird. Mine turned quickly to horror as I found like typo after typo, or other people started finding
oh
typos.
yeah,
In my initial run, I'm like, oh, and this went through like 5 editors, 5 readers, including myself, an English teacher who
yep,
should have known. And that's when you realize, oh, okay, what they say is true about you're going to see things on the print, on the page that you're not going to see on the screen. So
yes,
get that author proof first, then then you can move on to it. No, I totally get it, but there is something that feels more legitimate or real, like you're holding it in your hands, like I
yes,
wrote this. This is something I kind of gave birth to in a way,
yeah.
and you send it out in the world, and you because you do other things, um but I totally get that. Totally get that. Now, because you've written so many books over the last, I don't know, how long have you been writing? Eight,
Oh, I want
eight,
to
10,
say about 6 years now.
6 years. Okay. Have you ever read your own book like more than a year after you publish it? Like, it sat for a couple, 3 years, you go back and read it again?
Only when I'm doing sequels because I don't remember the stories as well as my fans do. Ironically, I don't know if you had that problem or not, but
Mhm.
yeah, but the fans remember way more than I do about my books.
Yeah.
So I had the Atomic Rex, for instance. I had never intended it for to be anything more than a one-shot deal, and now we're working on book 5 because it
Yeah.
caught on so well. So I have to go back and research like my own things, like, oh, what happened here?
Hmm.
Where Chimera 2 is an ongoing series, so I'll have to go back and reread what I had done. But no, like, because you know how it is. By the time you're done a book, I've read it like 4 or 5 times,
Yeah.
and still haven't picked up all the typos and things. But
Sure.
still, I've gone through it enough where it's
Yeah.
like I don't feel the need to do it again unless I need to go back and refresh my memory about things that had occurred in it.
Yes. And if you're doing it for that, yeah, my other books, I'll have to go back and read them. But like, since I'm working on the second of the series and I hadn't written it for a couple of years because I'd written 3 other books in between, 4 other books, Yeah, three of their books. I had to go back and reread it because like I just didn't remember anything about it. Like
Yeah.
other in general terms. Like, and so I was like waiting for the cringe, like and it didn't really come that much. I mean, there were parts where I thought, oh, this is a little schmaltzy. You need to rewrite this. Or if I could rewrite it, I would, but like it's not worth it rewriting it. But I thought for the most part, there were some lines like, oh, I don't remember writing that.
I
That's
know.
that's actually not bad, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, I knew I wrote it, but it's like I had no memory of writing it because when you're in the zone, you are just coming out, and so it was a very surreal kind of experience. So now when I write, because I have to keep that next to me, I have my screen split up into three. I've got my draft in the middle. On my left side is my outline. On my right side is my first book. So I'm remembering like, okay, what did this character like, what do they wear, what do they do, what do they say,
Right.
or what
Yeah.
was the detail, like what street was this place on. I'll try to like do a search like so if I can find it, because like, you know, I don't remember that stuff. But that's good that your fans do. That's, you know, you can always give them a call, like, you know, call your
Oh
super
yeah.
fans like, hey, I'm having a hard time, what was this guy's, what would this person do,
Yes.
you know. That's awesome. So just a few more questions, and
Sure.
we'll let you get out of here. What is your writer fantasy, if you have one?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, you know what? I'm gonna put it out there, and hopefully he hears this. But I've been doing a lot of crossovers lately, which is it's just fun. It's kind of like you had mentioned about like in the wrestling, it's different working with another person because you know we have only positive experiences, but there's been a few bumps in the road. It's been like, oh, we different viewpoints now. Something should come out, but for the most part, it's been enjoyable. So like I just did a crossover just because the fans asked me to with the girl character from an online comic, and I didn't know Ricky is the creator of it, and like I'd reach out to him, and now we're good friends. That was really cool. I'm doing a project with Andres Perez right now, and a couple other authors along the way. But what I'd really like to do, and my fans ask me all the time, is when are we going to get Atomic Rex to fight Jeremy Robinson's nemesis? So if Jeremy's listening, I get a daily request from it from some fan. You know, I know, hey, listen, it would do a lot more for me than it would for Jeremy. Okay, that's just
Yeah.
putting it out there. He's a lot bigger than I am.
Yeah.
But he's a cool dude. We have worked together before. So if we could get an Atomic, I'd prefer Chimera. He's my favorite one, but I know the fans want Atomic Rex. So if we could get an Atomic Rex versus Nemesis story together, I'd live for that. That'd be my dream.
Okay.
Plus,
Well,
he was
hey,
like my
maybe
inspiration
he's
too.
listening. You
So
never know. You know, you could always tag him
yeah,
if I mean, if you're friends on social media in any way, shape, or form. You know, yeah. I mean, it can't hurt. Maybe he'd be up for that too. You know, that's kind of that's fun. What advice would you give for anyone who wants to write? I mean, you've been pretty good at explaining your process, but if someone comes up to you and says, you know, Matthew, I'd like to start writing, how do I do it?
like I said, I would tell people just again, I use the Panther approach. Just start writing things down and take a look at what you have, and you have to keep going back to it. It's not something you're going to be instantly successful with, so you got to stick with it. So I would suggest start writing each day. If you don't like something, you can always throw it out and start over again. You know, anybody who's good at anything, whether it's writing or sports or any job that they do, you know, it takes a long time. I think I've heard that it's usually like 7 years before you really master something. So I'd say like just try to write and see what you can do. Be open to criticism. You've got to be open to criticism. And I have several people who like have been working, friends of mine online who have been trying to write a story for years and they just can't do it. So I would say if you're not enjoying it, it's not for you. Okay, like if you're enjoying the process, you know, keep going with it. But if you're not enjoying it, but you're looking to validate yourself, maybe it's not something that you want to make yourself unhappy with, right? Like if I don't want to write if I'm unhappy about it. I want to write because I enjoy doing it.
Yeah, because I mean, even under the best of circumstances, I mean, sometimes writing can be a joy. Most of the time, it's not, and it's
Right?
hard. It's
No.
hard work. People don't always understand how difficult and challenging it is to write, let alone write well, and to write something that makes sense and has internal logic when life itself doesn't.
Right.
Because that's going to be expected out of a book. Like, hey, this doesn't make sense. Like, well, what does in life? You know? No, I totally get that. That's good. So, Just two more things. So is there
Sure.
anything that you would like to promote while we are here?
Oh gosh, yeah. Please check out. You can look me up on Amazon. Matthew Dennion. I have 3 books in the Chimera series out. 5 in Atomic Rex. Like I said, I've just started writing for Raventail, so I just put out Agent 666, and the final host just came out. I don't even think it's out in paperback yet. It's out in digital. And then plus there are other one-shot books like Marsh Thing, Kaiju Core, Operation Rock does have a sequel in Operation Megalodon. So please check those out. Please follow me on social media under Matthew Dennion. I do have what I hope is a very fun April 1st surprise coming out soon. So people keep your eyes open for that. I don't want to spoil it now because it'll be an April Fool's surprise. So we're going to wait on that. But yeah, so please check out my work. You can find it on Amazon or on Severed Press, Wild Hunt Press, and Raventail Publishing are the 3 companies I'm working for. So
All right.
please check all of those out.
Yeah, well, that answered my last question, which was no, that's fine, which is where we can find your books. So no, that's great.
The other thing, real quick, Mark, if I could,
Sure.
I do always plug this, is myself and a bunch of other kaiju authors and artists run the charity Kaiju versus Cancer. I don't know if you've seen that or not around.
Yes, it's a good cause.
So what we do there is we'll put characters on shirts, and we try to homage classic kaiju or superhero posters, and we will sell them, but 100% of the proceeds go to help out kids fighting cancer at St. Jude's.
Great cause. Great cause.
Yeah, we had our good friend Chris Martinez, who did Fire Beast Oregon. You might have seen him at G-Fest. It's a fantastic comic.
Yeah.
Can't say enough about it, but do you have it there?
Yeah, I miss Chris. No, I don't. Oh, I do have it.
Oh, but
Chris painted this for me.
Oh, did he? Okay, so you know Chris well.
Oh, I know Chris. Yeah, and he passed shortly after doing this piece for me, and he said it was his favorite piece that he had done. And before I started crying,
I know.
He was just such a sweet guy. And just it kind of invigorated him. He just loved doing the pulp stuff, and he didn't charge me a dime for this, Matthew.
No,
just like he just said, no, I want to. He said, just let me post it on my site. Let me just go ahead and if I sell the original, I'll sell prints. I'm like, yeah, of course. So for me, having this, it keeps him near and allows me to honor him and because it's such a strong cover that I want people to see, and the fact that he was so excited about it and loved it so much. And I have all the, iterations that he sent in the drawings. I kept them all, on my phone. It's like all the interactions that we've had through Facebook. I keep all that because, he was just gone too soon. So no, I think that's a worthy cause. And anyone out there, donate, buy some books or t-shirts, please, buy posters and help fight cancer. Right.
Please, because I never forget, I was doing a podcast with Chris, and like we were kind of backstage, and he said, hey, I got to tell you something. I was like, wow. He told me he had cancer, and that was most likely fatal. And I was like, man, that is heavy stuff. Because Chris and I were good friends. We talk all the time, and we did a couple projects together. And anyway, I thought about it, and Chris was like, he was upset. He didn't have any kids of his own. He's married to his lovely wife. Sure,
right.
But I said to him, like, hey man, like before he died, I said, what if we do this? What if you're going through this struggle, but you can help out all these other kids that are fighting cancer. And it was like, he said, man, that's the greatest thing I could ever think of. So we do that to honor Chris, to help out kids with cancer. And I really like the fact that I can reach out to my friends and say, we've made these fictional characters, but we're going to make a real world impact with them in a positive manner.
Yeah, I love
it. So we do that. We haven't had any shirts up lately because like the companies and stuff we use were shut down by COVID, but hopefully very soon we get more shirts out there. Please check it out on Facebook. And we'll have some more shirts up for sale soon. And again, all the proceeds go to help out kids fighting cancer. So
that's fantastic. Well, Matthew, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. It's been great hearing about you and getting to talk with you. We haven't talked since G-Fest years ago, but it's nice to talk with you writer to writer and hear about your process. And I've always been just kind of you are very prolific, and I'm just like, wow, you're just coming out with another book. Here's Matt's other book. Like, holy cats, this guy's like on a roll. So no, I think it's fantastic, and I just wish you every success on all these publishing fronts, and just want to thank you for being on today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really been a pleasure. I love talking to other writers and being able to discuss the process. It's always so much fun. I hope that if anybody's out there inspiring, that we've helped them out today. I really do.
I hope so too.
On their journey as well.
That'd be great.
Thanks so much, Mark.
My pleasure. I'm going to do my sign out here and do my commercial, and we'll get out of here. You've been watching and listening to Between the Lines. You can listen to us on unsaneradio.com, listen to full episodes, or download to your device. You can watch us on our YouTube page, which is where you're at, Between the Lines podcast. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you know someone who would like our show, tell them about us. If you're a writer and would like to come on and have a chat with me, email me at betweenthelines54@yahoo.com, betweenthelines54@yahoo.com. And here's my cheesy outro, Matt. See you next time, Between the Lines.